I think most people here are aware of what performance management is meant to do. And I think probably a more interesting spin is to talk about like how it can be strategic. And I'd say the first step to kind of any strategy is to really understand where you're going. So having a really strong relationship with the executive team and, in my case, the GM, but CEOs elsewhere, and understanding kind of what is the direction of the company, where do we want to be in a few years. And then you use performance management as a tool to figure out where you are today in terms of strengths and weaknesses as an organization, across different functions, and as individuals. And through that process, you're able to then diagnose areas you can address through learning, through, in some cases, counseling people out, apprenticeship, and other approaches. And so, in essence, I think that performance management is really the underpinning for like everything we do in people. It's from retention to manage attrition to learning and development, organizational development, and everything.
So, Liz, I'm going to ask you a question. You were talking earlier about what does it mean to you and to your company, and how integral is it?
Sure. Oh, hello. Hi, everyone. So, performance reviews, we don't actually have a typical system for performance reviews, and actually performance and the expectations of what it means to perform at expected, depending on your role, at expected levels, starts on day one. So I meet with every new employee and we go over what kind of performance reviews at Trello look like. Our employee onboarding system is like a well-oiled machine right now, and so they know and they have all the information up front what that's gonna look like. So I'm talking to them about how we have a 30, 60, 90-day review, how it's between the manager at some points, how it's with me at some points, and at any point in time, it's gonna be, constant feedback. No employee should ever be surprised about how their performance is doing. So it's
constant feedback is what's kind of really interesting at this point. I mean, the article that I focused on was I talked to GE and Accenture, which are huge companies, and they have gotten rid of their annual reviews.
Right.
And the ones like GE like invented it, So we got small companies, right? Where maybe is that possible to do, in a big company? Is it harder to do in a small company?
You're getting rid of the more traditional?
No, constant feedback.
Oh yeah, no. I think if you have right management in place and right team leads and right people who want to be leaders with the right skill set, it's not an issue at all, as long as there's continuous feedback, one-on-ones as needed. And the performance and those potential reviews of, maybe someone's not performing the way they used to, and you want to see what's going on there, versus salary and all that are totally separate. We want to make sure there's no carrot hanging system where someone is thinking that there's a system to game in order to get the appropriate salary for what they're doing.
That must confuse a lot of your older employees.
Yeah, no, it's actually one of my best recruiting tools is early on I speak with them and I talk to them about how performance and leveling and all those things are done at Trello, and it's like the number one most attractive thing that they don't have to worry about doing busy work for potentially just for busy work's sake.
Jack, you have the largest company on stage here. Yes. Are you also moving to that kind of model with constant feedback?
I would say yes, it's our intent to do that. And I have to be really honest, up until about 6 months ago, we didn't have a very good, consistent performance management, performance feedback system. And probably it was due to the fact that we were growing so fast. I mean, I started with the company in 2012. We had 200 employees and 3 offices. Today, as you mentioned, we have 729 employees in 23 offices around the world. So tremendous amount of growth, and it was a concentration on that. So we started thinking, okay, we've got to come up with a way to provide more consistent, straightforward, and continuous feedback to people. And one of the biggest reasons why we came to that conclusion was because as we do our employee pulse surveys, and we do 3 of those a year, we found out that one of the biggest motivating factors in that survey that are what you call engagement factors. The most compelling engagement factor was the need for, on the part of employees, for transparency. And I just heard Liz talk about, sitting with people and talking about their levels, how often they'll be reviewed, what they'll be reviewed on. We hadn't articulated any of that, and so we got that feedback. And the second thing that was really the igniter for us was people were saying, what's really important to me also is career path. What's my career here going to be? And it's not a lifelong career. We all know that. Nobody stays at a company forever, for 30 years, 35 years. Some people do, but very few people do these days. But there are careers within companies, and you want to extend those as much as possible. So the need to provide a pathway, a communication pathway to people to show them how they can grow comes through the whole issue of looking at performance. And the final thing I'll say about it is that, to me, performance is tapping into an individual's motivation. We hire, we think, some of the smartest people in the world. We have to. For example, we have in one group of engineers, we have 20 PhDs in computer science who also have subspecialties in statistics. I mean, they're very rare finds. You can't find them, and you want to hold on to them. You want to keep them. So we find them, and you want to keep them. In order to keep them, you have to grow them. If you don't grow them, they'll leave. In San Francisco,
What do you mean by grow them?
There are a lot of dimensions to that.
Do they just care about growing their salary, or like maybe an inflated title? Like, what makes people stay?
Yeah, for the most part, it isn't salary. I mean, obviously, there's a baseline that you have to attain with salary and with overall compensation. When you're talking about your base salary, your variable salary that goes with it, and stock, those are the three major common components. If those aren't right, then people are going to get irritated by them. But as a researcher said many, many years ago, money doesn't make people happy, it just keeps them from being unhappy. And you want to be at a place where you're basically keeping people from being unhappy. But I think what growing means in our terms is, how do I get promoted? What do I need to learn and do in order to get promoted? So how do I get trained to do that? And the basis for all of that is tapping into the individual's motivation. So you start, I think, when you're trying to recruit people. You're looking at very smart people, but not every smart person is totally motivated to break through any obstacle that comes their way to be successful. Some people will wilt when certain things come their way. So you want to try to find out who these people are that are going to not do that. And then if you find those individuals, then the next thing you have to do, to Liz's point, is you need to support them. You need to get that intrinsic motivation supported with extrinsic or external support from managers. And you need to teach managers how to do that. And we could go on all night. I mean, if somebody would want to have a drink with me, I'll talk to you about
we did earlier. It was nice
to do that, and we'll go on till 2 or 3 in the morning about that. But to me, that's the key.
Elizabeth, now, you say you have a very young workforce, and is this change that we're seeing right now in performance reviews have to do with the fact that these younger people just have short attention spans or something like that?
I actually don't think, I think that it's because of the volume. We were talking about this earlier. I think there's always been young people in the workforce. People graduate university, they come into your company. It's not a new phenomenon. I think what's different is that you have the volume of people in your organizations is much larger that are younger. And one of the things that I was sharing earlier with the group when we were chatting is that I feel like society is pre-programmed, right? We went through 16 years of school, and if you went to graduate school, potentially 18, before you hit the workforce. And what are we programmed with? We're programmed with getting feedback. You know what your test scores are, you know what your report cards are, you know how you do on your projects. You're given grades,
your entire, like, from the time you're 5 all the way until you're, 20 something. And then you hit our companies, right? And then what do? We need to train our managers to Jack's point, to give feedback, right? And people are used to getting feedback. It may not necessarily be letter grade, but it's what is the feedback that we're giving to employees? And in the traditional model, we're like, wait for a year. We'll tell you how you're doing a year from now. And no one's used to that, right? They're used to, every week maybe having a quiz, once a quarter getting a report card. And now we've shifted their behavior to wanting them to only get feedback once a year. And we almost need to retrain our managers and help our managers, to Jack's point, to give really frequent feedback. And I think that's what you're seeing, because you're seeing a volume, the millennials and the volume of your workforce shifting, where you have a younger and younger population. I mean, here at VEVO, we have 50% of our staff is under the age of 30. So we have many, many employees out of the 300 that we have that are very close to having recently graduated. So I think that's what you're seeing. I don't think it's new. I think we've all been programmed that way. I think you're just seeing it because there's so much more of that in your workforce.
Yeah, I agree with Elizabeth. People want feedback. In fact, the new terminology is not even feedback anymore, it's feed forward, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I don't think it has anything to do with how old you are. It's technology. Technology has changed how we do everything. Everyone's on their phones. There's something beeping every second. You post something on Instagram or Facebook and you have a like. So you have instant feedback every second of the day. And so why should that be any different at the office? Right? So we have to change our offices to be more like real life. And so whether you're 27 or 47, you're still on Facebook. Right? In fact, you're probably more on Facebook if you're 47 these days. But that's a whole... So we have to change the model, right? And so we have to start thinking about how do we give people the feedback in real time so that way they can do something with it. And then the real challenge is teaching your managers how to give actionable feedback that resonates. So take what Jack said, like some people want X and other people want Y, and so you have to figure out their intrinsic and extrinsic motivations and then talk to them in very different ways.
Eric, each question here is, I'm an old school manager and I don't get this, and I'm like, how much is this going to cost me? This sounds like a lot of hand-holding and a lot of work. I mean, are you just like, is your HR staff's like exploded?
No, it costs you 25 minutes of discussion time that you'll probably have anyway, so you use it better.
Okay.
I'd
Right.
actually jump in and say that what is the cost to not do it?
Oh, that's a good answer.
Because that to me is what your other side of
So
it is,
retaining
right?
talent, I think this-
Retaining talent is key, and I think, you often hear, I'm sure all of you do, you sit in exit interviews with people and they give you the laundry list of why they're leaving. They're firing their boss people, that's why they're leaving, right?
Wow.
And 90% of the time it has to do something with their manager, and that's why they're leaving. Their manager didn't hear something that was important to them, to your point, that they didn't find that intrinsic point. So that's what's happening, right?
Yeah,
So that's what's so critical.
Yeah, exit interviews, I always bubble it up as, here's how we failed, right? So like, don't have it, I mean, it's on us, not them. But to also piggyback off the managers, I think it's key to have the right people in place. I think there's at least on the technical side, there's mistakes that are made where engineers, they are maybe in a place where traditionally the only way to advance is to move into management positions, and they're not great managers, they're great developers. And so then you have your best developers being really bad managers, and then you have the team under them not happy, and they're not happy. And so we installed a place where we promote developers to developers, just let them do what they're
Give a
best
title like
at.
head developer.
Yeah, I
whatever.
mean, it's just let people do what they do best. And there are people out there with management leadership skills, and there are people that don't have them. And you need to invest in the people that actually want to do. I mean, VP of engineering is in his days. I can't even get to him anymore. It's nonstop one-on-ones, but he loves it, and he is amazing. And he has turned, so many things around, but he wants to be doing it, right? So that's just a great find. But if you have people in our system in place where you think the only way to advance your career or grow is to, go into management or go into a leadership position, then you have people fighting for it that maybe aren't great at it or don't want to do it. So you have to get other avenues of success. How can you grow outside of a management track? How can you just be the best content marketing manager on the team?
I wish that I would, because apparently I have to be an editor, and I don't want to edit people's work, you know, but apparently, like, that's where I'm going to end up. But I'm going to delay it as much as possible. Sue, I'm going to ask you a question. Can you walk me through a specific example of how you guys, I mean, what is Venmo doing for annual feedback? You got a very young workforce as well. Are you using, like, what technologies are you using? Have you created an app for?
Yeah, no, we'll talk about it. Well, I guess the first thing I would say, because I just want to respond to a couple things that were being discussed, one of which was that, like, large companies like Accenture and GE are kind of doing away with reviews. And I think it's ironic because in some ways I think some of these larger established companies are able to do it because they have well-entrenched norms and structures and managers who understand what calibration looks like and what good looks like. Whereas like smaller companies like Venmo, we have managers who are like first-time managers, learning to give feedback, don't really know what good looks like, and so we have to have more kind of structured processes. And so the way we've done it, we've only done one pilot mid-year review so far in my tenure, because I've only been at Venmo for about 9 months, or actually 11 months. And we use a system of Google Docs, so not anything fancy. And the reason for that is it was a pilot, and we were like, let's just first see how it works before we invest in any new software. And kind of created a set of rubrics for each functional area and each level that was, for the first time, I think, letting people understand what does good look like, what are the expectations for your role, and then you know, doing kind of what I think is considered like classic performance management stuff, like you have people do self-reviews, you have people do peer reviews, which I guess people call 360s. They do upward reviews for their managers, and then the manager takes all of that into account, except their own review, obviously. And then provides feedback back to the individual. Now that's something that we do semi-annually, but that doesn't mean they don't give feedback. So I think I think we've been using the word feedback and kind of replacing that with performance management. I think it's a very different thing. And so our managers are encouraged to give feedback tactically at least once a week during one-on-ones, and then more holistically once a month.
So your managers meet with your employees once a week? Wow. Is that normal at your company?
Yes.
We do too.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I don't think I've ever met my manager before. It's probably why media has gone to hell. Jack, it's a question. You described kind of almost a bespoke system, like where you have to tailor make the reviews for the person and for the manager. Is that difficult to do?
Well, you can have a format that is uniform, and within that format, though, you can differentiate according to what the needs of the person is, and you should do that. You know, that old saying, all size, you know, one size fits all is totally untrue in the business that we're in. And people do have different things that motivate them, and not that we have this infinite series of tools to be able to motivate people, but there are a lot of things that you can do. For example, if you take the issue of recognition, recognition can take many different forms. You can give a person a bonus. You can say, that was really good work that you did, and people will really appreciate that. But you can also, for example, say, I expect that you're going to be successful at doing this very difficult job that you've never done before. I'm going to do everything I can to help you be successful, but my expectation is that you're going to be successful. That is a very serious and real form of recognition that a lot of people don't really recognize, but it is there. And so what we're trying to do is introduce this positive set, wider-based pieces of recognition into the language or the nomenclature that we use, and we're working with our managers to do that. And one of the tools that we have, for example, is, and I'm sure many of you have heard of it, we use the tool Strength Finders. How many people have used that? It's an excellent tool. And what's so good about it is it's very positive. It focuses on what you are strong at, what you are good at, what we all can easily find out what we're not so good at, and it's obvious what that is, and we can help deal with that. But focusing on the positive side, and in our case, we found out that the dominant characteristics at Quantcast, and this relates back to how we hire, are people who see themselves as learners and achievers. So that's a key to how you motivate people and how you grow and develop them. So what we're trying to do is kind of break the code on performance management by getting down into smaller pieces and figuring out how they all fit together so that people can feel like they have a career with the company. And the one thing I'll say is in San Francisco, where we are, out of the 729 people, 380 are in the city of San Francisco, so the vast majority are there. That's where we started. It is a hugely competitive environment there. I call it a predatory recruiting environment. And I personally am participating in it because, as I was telling Liz, we have 20 recruiters in our company who are data mining all day to try and steal people from other companies in the same geography.
He apologizes
Stay
to
away from me.
And the reason why that happens is, and you have to pay attention to your environment, the reason why that happens is because most people who work in San Francisco live there, vast majority live there because they want to, it's a great city. Secondly, they don't have a car, so they don't want to drive down to the valley. Yes, Google takes them down on a bus, or Yahoo takes them down on a bus, but that's like 1%. It's very, very minor. So most people want to stay in the city. So they see their work environment and their career essentially in a neighborhood that stretches about 23 blocks. So we're dealing with a huge problem there. And you have two choices. You can give up and say, we're just going to accept a churn and turnover, or you can say, no, I've worked so hard to get these people. I want to do the best that I can to hold on to them, and I have to keep them motivated. And part of that is the performance, feedback, communication, motivation spectrum that you have in mind.
Liz, I want to go to, okay, so you've done the review, all right? What goes on afterwards? What do you do with all this data and all this information that you're gathering? And, feel free anyone else to chime in on this one too, because it's like, I don't know, it seems that you get a lot of stuff, a lot of metrics, but are they actionable? Can you show your board or your CEO, that, we spent, all this amount of time, we got these metrics, and this is what it means, and how do you put it to work?
Well, I have my managers involved early on as well. And again, just repeating myself a little bit, but the goal is that the employee is never, ever surprised at any point in time. If you ever have to get to the point where someone is on like a performance plan or even being let go, there's zero surprise. If there's a surprise at any point in time, it comes back on us, and we just didn't do our job of constant feedback and full transparency. It's interesting that you asked that because let's say at the 90-day review mark, because that's in a real official time, I give my notes back to the employee, I give my notes back to the hiring manager and to our CEO, and we move on, but it doesn't stop there. That's like the end of kind of the formal, and then it's the constant day-to-day, and depending on their role, being on the sales team is very different than being on the design team, and every role has a different set of goals. But every year, we do leveling, which is completely separate to performance.
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so we make sure that we're paying for every role market competitive rates. So for us, that's a startup, Series A, New York City company. And we collect lots of data. I have my personal network, I have my portfolio network from my investors, we have our sister companies, and I collect information as much as possible, and every role has its own chart with years of experience, and that is where the salary number comes from. Salary for us is not tied to performance at all. And that makes the performance conversations easier, and that makes the salary conversations easier. And an example that I'll give is if someone comes to me and says, you know what, I don't think my role is market rate anymore. We're like, okay, let me collect the data, let me investigate. Let me see if November 2015, something has changed that I'm not cued into. And so then I'll collect the data and I'll turn back to them. And if they are correct, I just did this the other day with someone, I said, you're absolutely correct. You weren't market anymore, here's your new salary, here's the retro, and because there was two people doing the same role, they also get a raise. So
I'm going to work
it's
for Liz.
completely based off.
Seriously, right?
It's completely based off of thing, but then you know that everyone is performing at their highest level because it's not tied we can't keep people that aren't performing at their highest level. So if you're no longer performing, let's have a conversation that's separate of that. Let's set new goals, new deadlines, really clear. Do you agree to these, what's expected? Do you agree to this timeline? Do you have the tools? Is it on us so far? Is it on you? Do you have the tools to get your job done? How can we help you succeed? Because we do want you to succeed. But if you're no longer succeeding, let's have a conversation of, maybe it's a certain project, maybe it's moving to a different team, maybe it's focusing instead of both, iOS and Android, you're just iOS, maybe it's, whatever, maybe your scope needs to change, maybe it's personal stuff and we give them paid time off to deal with that, whatever it may be, it's individualized, but it's clear, it's upfront between me, the hiring, manager for that particular team, and the employee, and then along the way, it's constant feedback again. Then it's weekly check-ins with the manager and that person that's on the plan. And then if they continue to be employed with us, they're performing at the level we expect, so they should be getting paid market rate competitive salaries.
So just responding to your question around data. So I interpreted your question a little bit differently, and more around what do you do with the performance feedback data? So, I think the one obvious thing that everyone must do is kind of figure out what the action plan is for each individual, and that's part of the performance review process. But one other thing that we haven't done at Venmo, but we plan to, and that I've done at McKinsey and the hedge fund I worked at before, was actually looking at all of the data in aggregate across all of the individuals, as well as by function, to kind of parse out what are the themes. So we would even go as far as really just dissecting the free text to see what are people saying are the issues, and that enables you to figure out, okay, I'll give you an example. When I was at the hedge fund, we were analyzing all of the feedback for the traders and analysts, and there was a theme around not taking enough risks and not being innovative enough. And so that enabled us to have a dialogue with the head of the group and say, okay, this sounds like this is something that we really need to do something about. How do we address it? And through that set of conversations, we created an apprenticeship program where we matched MDs who are known for innovation with SVPs. And then we also just had it was the first time they actually had that kind of conversation. So I think there's a lot of data that you can mine from the review process that you can then bubble up and create larger programs.
Eric,
So
you seemed a little impressed by.
I'm totally impressed,
Yeah.
but I can't. I don't understand how that works in the real world. So I want to come to her life for a little bit.
Exactly. How does it work with you?
So for me, it's all about tying performance to some rewards, right? Because if you start to think about things in sort of like the neuroscience type way, it's like when you do something great and you get something good about it, there's like a little dopamine rush, right? It's like, why do people play those games online? I'm not one of them, but you get a little thing and you're like, oh, you get so excited and you're just doing it again and doing it again. So I think what we need to do, or at least what I want to take away from that, is that how do we give people that dopamine rush so that way they want more of it, right? So you give them a goal, you say to them, if you hit this goal, you will get this. And you tie it to something that they like or want. Maybe it's money, maybe it's something else. And then when they do it, then they get excited. And then you give them another one. And so it's like each time they want to do it more and more. And so I want to use what we know about, how the mind and the body works to sort of drive that. So, we talk, I use the word feed forward. There are two things, right? When probably anyone in this room, how many of you ever went into a performance review and you were excited to go into that performance review? Do I get any hands? 6, right? And we're about 100 people, right? So nobody, sorry, let me rephrase, not nobody, almost nobody goes in feeling excited, right? So then there's the other side of the coin, right? And so when you're nervous and scared, you have a different neurological reaction. And so if you give people feedback, they say, oh shit, I'm gonna get this, my boss is gonna say this, I know I did that. And so all this stuff goes on in their head. So if you start to turn feedback into feed forward, then it takes what Jack says, I want you to be successful, right? And so if you can start to have conversations about, all right, I saw this, and if you do X for your next situation, you might be a little bit more successful in it. While it's nuanced, it changes the dynamic and it changes the neuro pathways in a way where it's like you start to go, oh, not towards the fight or flight, but it's towards the, oh, I want to be that person that learns and grows. And so,
Now, Elizabeth, you said, I mean, what do you think about this?
No, I was going to actually agree with, Erin.
You're with the carrot sticks.
No, I completely am, and actually, it's super relevant today. I mean, today, I'll plug VEVO for 5 seconds.
Please.
We had a new iOS launch today, so update your app, update your phones. So we had a new iOS launch today, and one of the things we were talking, I mean, this is like today, like 3-4 hours ago, we were in our executive meeting having a conversation about, okay, so several members of our organization worked tirelessly in order to get this new, reboot to happen, and we want to reward that because we want more of that same performance to come out of them. And we were talking with our CEO and said, how can we drive that? Is it a spot bonus? Is it, you haven't seen your wife because you've been held up in our offices working tirelessly. Can we give you a gift certificate to go out to dinner and take your wife out you haven't seen in days? What is it that helps? And it goes back to all the conversations we had, like, what do you intrinsically know about the person? What rewards them? Is it money? Is it an experience? Is it extra time off? Is it
It's bespoke, right?
Like,
Like,
what
so
is
every-
it to enable to drive that? Because I agree with you.
So are you going to do different, I'm just curious, are you going to do different things depending on the individual?
That's sort of potentially the plan.
Okay, so you are going to.
I mean, this is like live in the moment happening, people. Like, we're like literally.
So just do you set like a dollar amount like for something, and then like, oh, we'll give golf to this guy who likes playing golf or something like that?
I think we're kind of making it up as we go, right? I mean, I think that it's how are we reacting to a business that's, and I sort of talked about this earlier when we worked together. Business is becoming more agile, right? Why are we talking about moving away from the annual performance review, and why is that such a hot topic? Because the agility that our businesses, particularly in the tech space that we're all in, move so fast that I would argue the day that you set your annual goal, 30 days later, it's almost irrelevant. And so you need a shorter time span in which to manage performance, if you will. And one of the things that our team is talking about is, do we shift it to a quarterly conversation? What do we shift it to? And how do we set goals and manage performance to that that's aligned with our business, right? Which is a lot of what all of us have been talking about
Now,
today.
Liz, now you are the other camp, right? You would think that, there's the carrot sticks guys and then whatever you do. Can you explain why that works for y'all?
Yeah, so we're anti-carrot stick, but I do agree with everything everyone's saying. It's just, and so we're, a lot of similarities here, just, I guess, the things that we give, I suppose, the things how we show the success or the reward, like, it can be, there's so many different things. Like, we have some developers that just want more autonomy. We have, and usually it never comes down to the dollar amount because for us, we're already paying very competitive market rate. And so when I have these conversations of either job well done or, how do we, I want you to be successful, where do we go from here? It's always different things. It never comes down to money. I even point blank say, what if, it was this? I'm like, they don't even want it. It's like not
What is the weirdest
about
thing
thing.
that you gave somebody?
Weirdest thing that we gave someone.
Besides money, I just think that people, I covered Wall Street for 10 years. All it
You
did
know,
was put it in money.
Some people get burnt out and they want to know that they can take a sabbatical and come back with job security.
Right.
Some people want more work-life balance and work from home. We're a very distributed company. Only half of us are in HQ. The other half are mostly throughout the United States, but some international as well. And supporting that and making sure they feel like they're part of the company is important. Some people just want to be heard and listened to. I had someone in my office right before coming here that, her path to success is going to be totally different than someone else. So they know, if the money's kind of not part of the conversation, right? Like they don't have any problem with that. Then you get to know them and what's going to make them feel like they're succeeding and being appreciated. And what's the weirdest thing? I don't know. This isn't any time recently. That we're talking like 2007. I sent someone to any trip they wanted. They, picked Disney World, and so we sent them to Disney World for a week. I don't know. That was the weirdest thing.
can I shift the conversation just a second, because
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, you guys came here to talk about performance reviews, right? And we're talking about rewards, so I'm not
Right.
sure we're talking about the things you want to hear. So one of the things, if I was sitting in your shoes, I might be asking, like, when should I talk, all these ideas about, like, is it time to kill performance reviews? What does that mean? Should I, shouldn't I? If I kill it, how do I decide how to pay people? Like, these are the conversations we were having at the table, so I think we need to have them here, so if you're okay with it.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I joined the new company, several months ago, and I asked myself the same thing that you all are probably asking: how much time do we spend on performance reviews, and is it valuable, right? How do I know if it's valuable? Well, you kind of sort of know, right? You're part of these organizations. You can ask a couple people here and there. So I got a sense early on that ours was not valuable, and so in the back of my mind,
We just did the traditional yearly.
yearly review. They did once a year reviews and once a year salary reviews, and coming in, you've done this long enough. They just, most of them are just awful, right? So let's just start with that as a premise, and then you validate. And so I'm in the middle of doing a employee survey, and one of the questions is very specific about how valuable do you find our performance review process. I haven't got all of the survey questions back, but I think I'm at 46% think it's valuable, which to me is like, holy shit, this is ridiculous. If I spend 2 hours, it's probably a waste of time, right? So if I want to get like so left or right on it. So in my mind, the first thing I'm going to do is just not do them, right? Because if people don't find it valuable, then I have to ask myself, why are we doing it? So whether you're in a big company or a small company, ask yourself, why are we doing this? Are we doing this to appease the management team, so that way we can prove to them that X or Y is right or wrong, or we should pay person X this and person Y that? Or are you doing it to actually help people improve, right? And then if your answer is the former, then great, continue doing it, right? Your organization is your organization. Not everything's the same for each person. For our organization, we want to help people improve. So if we want to help people improve, then I need to then think about how are we going to do that? And so we do, and like some of you, I think we all said, our managers meet with our employees once a week, if not once a week, once a month minimum. So why not use those conversations to drive how do we have positive feed-forward conversations that help people grow? And we do something called OKRs. If you're part of the tech world, you know about it. It's something that Google did and some others, where it's basically cascading goals done on a quarterly basis. We took some of the tenets from that, and we actually decided not to take all of them, where OKRs is objectives, key results, and you don't tie them to performance and salary, and I think we're going to go back to what I was saying before. So if we do it once a month, conversations that help you grow and develop, and once a quarter, hey, these are the goals we set out, you agreed on them, and you're not achieving them or you're exceeding them, then those should drive the conversations that allow us to then have real conversations about comp and rewards and that kind of stuff. So that's my 2 cents for you guys. I don't know if that's helpful, and forgive me if I've realigned the conversation in a way you didn't like, but if I were you, I think I came for that.
Yeah, actually, can I add one more thing? Because I think that the question around the value of performance management should also not just include the value that individuals get, but really whether you're shaping the workforce to be prepared for what the business will be doing. And I think that that's something that often gets neglected when we talk about these types of things, because we get so into is this person learning and are they going to get the right feedback? But that is like ultimately the reason why we're here, is to think about employees and how they're going to help us attain our business objectives.
So, talking about effective feedback, do you have any suggestions for best techniques for actually delivering that feedback? Is it maybe focusing on one particular item each time that you meet with an individual contributor, or other ideas for actually delivering that feedback?
Who wants to take that?
I'm happy to. We as managers often want to tell people what they could be doing better and differently. And I had to learn this, just like any other manager. It's better to ask, what do you think you did well this quarter? What do you think you did well this week? what are some of the struggles you're having? What do you think you could have done better? And ask them. Most people know. And if they don't know, this is a different kind of conversation, right? And then as you start to have those conversations, it becomes, that sort of neuroscience, right? If they're telling you, it's less scary than you telling them, even though they know it already. So I would suggest you ask 2 or 3 kind of open-ended questions and let them kind of provide that to you.
Yeah, we do the same thing. I mean, I start, what do you call, well, I'm not going to say the expression when you call it, but you start everything with a positive, when then maybe some feedback, and then positive again. So for me, it's always like, what's going well, same thing, always conversational, always question, you let them talk, you have to listen, you try and listen as much as possible. But what's going well, what needs improving, whatever conversation happens in the middle, and then where do you want to go? I always ask, what do you want to accomplish in the next 90 days? And then, we can loop back in and see if you were able to do that. And if not, where were the blockers? The blockers can come from anyway. But yeah, I think letting them speak, employees know, everyone, we know.
Most.
Well, most.
Hi, thanks for all of your input. It's fantastic, and your insights. I'm also a proponent of neuroleadership, and I wanted anyone on the panel to also address the way in which you give feedback, because if you're moving out of a culture in which there's not feedback and you're going from the carrot and the stick into feedback, I've noticed managers, and I've been a manager myself, where employees that are not intrinsically motivated are going to approach feedback as attack, and that's going to be counterproductive. So I think there's a key component that needs to be addressed in the way, as my friend here next to me, in which you give the feedback and how you introduce the feedback to the employee, because it can be very much interpreted as being an attack. And also, have any of you introduced coaching culture into your cultures as a way of doing that sort of dialogue?
Yeah, first of all, to answer the second question that you asked about coaching, yes, we do offer coaching to certain situations where we feel it will really make a difference with an individual, and it will help them overcome an obstacle that's keeping them from the excellence that we really believe they can get to. I mean, that's the basis for it. Now, with respect to your first question, I think everything needs to start with what is driving the success of the business. What are the metrics that we have installed that truly measure how the business is doing? And tying that to what the individual's role is and how they are participating in the success of those metrics, and having a discussion along those lines, which is a very realistic discussion that very few people, even people that are not intrinsically motivated, and please don't misunderstand me when I say this, can wiggle out of. They really need to face up to themselves. And I think some straight talk that hopefully is built because they trust you over time. You have built a relationship with them. It's very difficult to do when they're in an initial relationship with you, but over time, you can have those kinds of dialogues and have them hopefully make a change to include, saying things to them such as, look, we're not just talking about the metrics, we're talking about what is getting in the way of you being successful. And frankly, I can't climb into your mind and really understand what your attitude is. That's something that's just ephemeral. I don't really know what it is. All I'm looking at is what your behavior is. And your behavior is perhaps getting in the way. And I'd like you to think about that. And if you want some help in terms of how to change that, I'm all in on that. So it's having that positive discussion, but to Liz's point, you also have to be a little confrontative as well, I think, with situations like that.
Could I add a little bit to that? Because I think I would probably approach it slightly differently. And the way I usually give some kind of more constructive feedback is it starts way before the meeting where you actually give this person the feedback. It's all about building trust in the relationship all along the way so that they believe that you're there to really help them. And you are. You're not just like pretending. You actually really do care about them. And then you empathize with them, and you can say, like, especially when you think about someone with low intrinsic motivation, it's like the classic skill level matrix. They're like at the bottom left-hand corner, and in that situation, you usually have to direct them. but not in a directive sense. But once they believe that you're there to help them, I think that you can be a bit more directive.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the meeting I was in before coming here, it started with, someone that came in and was like, can I have a therapy session? But clearly it's more than that, right? It's what's going on, how can we get you back on track? But
So an employee came to you and
Yeah.
said, "Can I have a therapy session?"
yeah, I say 60% of my job is being a therapist, and
Interesting.
40, yeah. It's because they know they can come talk to me about anything, and then, you got to figure out, like, taking part out of, like, okay, dissect what they told me, and then I let them know the minute they start talking, even though they say it's therapy. I'm like, I'm going to be taking notes because, there's got to be some actual items. Like, if you just coming to me, you're asking for help. So let's figure out what that really is. Let's take apart maybe the emotional side of it, and let's talk about, okay, is the scope too much, is whatever's happening. But then I'm going to follow up with you.
Is that their manager that they meet with every week? Is it because it's usually a personality problem?
No, that's my job. I mean, I'm supposed to, part of retention and keeping our employees happy, they can go to them if they know they can. Their first week of every new employee, I say, my door and my virtual door, because I have a set video thing, is always open. I'm a resource for you to talk about everything and anything, no matter what. But I keep it up. And I always check back in with them, how you doing? Just regular conversation, just how are you? And so they know by the time, maybe there is a problem that they can come to me with anything, but they know it's also professional, right? I'm not just their friend.
Right,
It's there's got to be an action on this. What is the root of the problem? There's got to be something on, but yeah.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think it's about why the one-on-ones are so important is it's you're building trust, in time with that between the manager and employee, right? So in your one-on-ones, you might be talking about, tactical things of the week, or, for me, oftentimes it's like, how are you? What's going on? How can I help you? And you start building, I think, that support network so that when the tables are turned and you do need to give feedback, you've built that trust along the way because you've helped that person grow along the way, and they know that you're there for them, and it's not about an attack. It's about you're supporting their growth.
We have time for one more? Oh, wonderful. Okay, great. Gentleman right here in the front.
Hi, Jordan Berman from OFC Office Channel. Disclaimer, I sleep with the woman in the middle. She's my wife, sorry. Probably should have said that. Yeah.
This is a room full of HR.
I was going to say I've had 2 children with her.
Now this is getting good.
So I told her
And you thought we were dry.
Exactly. The beer is really good here. I've heard Netflix say, they have like a no brilliant jerks rule. And I heard someone at Yahoo once say, we have a no dicks, no divas rule. How do you reconcile that approach with the fact that it's a really tight talent market, especially in New York for engineers and other technically minded folks? How do you balance that in the performance management, personality, culture versus, hey, this person's a killer programmer?
That starts from day one, too. Like, part of my first week session with someone is talking about how we use internal tools. So we use chat heavily. We use video chat heavily. We use our product Trello heavily. And that a lot of communication is happening in text form. And if you don't get to know someone well enough, and it's only in that medium, things might be taken out of context. You can't let things escalate, right? Like, immediately try and get face-to-face time if you can, or jump on the video chat if you can. And it's all about that. I had a really, really talented developer who just, in the written word, let's say in pull requests, was not the nicest. He didn't even realize, right? And it's just a conversation. And because I had built up that relationship, I'm like, you are amazing. But you're not just here because you're an amazing developer. You also have to be an amazing coworker. You have to be reliable. You have to be respectful. You have to handle things with maturity. Let's get you to work on that, right?
Is it a cultural or an age thing at all?
No, it could be.
It could be anything.
It could be
Anything
anyone.
cross-cuts.
Yeah.
Jack?
Yeah, what I would say is, at our company, we do our best to not hire jerks or dicks. What we do to avoid that, and you're not always totally 100% successful. People do get through the screen. But the reason why we've decided against that is because people like that no matter how talented and creative they are, can be incredibly destructive to your culture. They can be silently destructive to it. You'll have people leave who will say, well, I'm leaving because I got a better job, I've gotten more money. But in reality, the reason they're leaving is because they don't want to work with this person anymore. And they see this person in their minds continuing to be empowered in the organization, so they say, I'm out of here. I mean, I cannot abide this, and there's nothing that can be done, and the company's doing nothing. So we try to do that, and one of the ways we do it is in our interview process, we have a panel of interviewers, and it's cross-functional, and we have somebody in that panel called a bar raiser. And the bar raiser is usually a more senior person who has a kind of a broader worldview, and they look at the issues of temperament, collaboration, teamwork, leadership, those kinds of attributes that you really want everybody to have, irrespective of whether they're going to be a manager or not. And that works for us most of the time. But as I said, occasionally we will get someone like that.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, I mean, it's been said that company culture is, you can work really hard to create an amazing company culture, but company culture ends up being the worst thing you let happen, go. So you can have a team that's doing events and all these policies and bonuses and free gifts and free lunch and all the things, and you have someone who's not being very nice get away with maybe insulting someone publicly, and that defines your company culture. Your company culture now becomes someone who is allowed to not be nice. And so we were historically not good with getting rid of people quickly, and we are much better at just letting people go. You just can't, your tolerance for bad behavior just has to get higher and higher, because your coworkers, they're like, oh, it doesn't matter, I guess that's who we are now. So you're constantly having to do like an internal self-reflection of, we had a thing where, we were having great success, everyone, we had a town hall, and it was like a giant pep rally, and people could not be happier to be at the company. And then someone did something a little bit publicly, like let's say on Twitter, and it was like this really weird gray area, because it was like a private account, but it represented the company, and it made someone feel uncomfortable, and it was like, well, that's us now, right? So we have to address it. You can't let it go. That everything else that was just amazing up until 2 seconds ago is now gone, because their coworker is going to be like, oh, well, management didn't care about that. And so then you have to figure out what conversations do you have privately, because a lot you do, what you have publicly, and when you stop. So maybe the conversation starts publicly, if, this isn't okay, let's continue privately, and just so people know that it's being taken care of. There's like a really fine line between what's one-on-one, what's with the team, what you're communicating to who. But in terms of, sometimes you just have to let people go sooner rather than later, or just have a really good, honest conversation up front and be like, okay, that's not gonna fly here. So that's gotta change, or the next time, unfortunately, you're amazing, but unfortunately, you're not gonna be able to stay here. Yeah, it didn't used to be, but I have to be now, because it brings the best people. You end up losing the people that you want to stay, and the ones that are not great are staying. You gotta be harsh.
Yeah, none of you specifically addressed the issue of rankings or ratings. Do any of you actually give ratings to people, and is that helpful or counterproductive?
So when you say ratings, we don't do rankings, but we do, for people's reviews, there's a 5-point scale.
There's a what
We
scale?
have the same 5-point scale.
And how do you think that helps deliver any message?
I'm trying to think. I know at previous companies like McKinsey, they don't actually disclose the rating, and that's deliberate, because they feel like people get so obsessed with the rating, they don't actually hear the message around what they need to work on. At Venmo, we do disclose the rating, and it's been fine. I think we're pretty transparent about things like that.
So someone, is that a grade, like, so every year they're given, or how often do you, again, it goes back to the grading thing about the millennial generation, is do you tell them, is every quarter they get a new grade, or something like that? And then
We're annual. We're annual, and I mean, you do get a rating at it, but I think that we end up, awkward bell curve because everything sort of squishes towards the center.
Sure.
So I don't put a lot of stake behind the rating. I put a lot of stake behind the conversation, right? So that to me is where I try to focus our managers, and oftentimes what I say is the annual performance like form and the rating. It's a tool, right? If we were all really good at giving performance feedback, goodbye tool, hello conversation. But I think we're trying to give people the framework of which to have that conversation, and that's where the tool. And I think we talked about that earlier. Like we're trying to help our managers, have tools in which to have good conversation.
We have a 4-point scale, and I only like 2 of those points. And I don't like them in the sense of liking them.
Which
but
2?
They're easy, they're unambiguous. The bottom one needs improvement. Yeah, I mean, if you're honest and if the performance is measurable, it's easy to identify people who would fall into that category. And secondly, at the top, the outstanding employees, where everyone knows they're truly outstanding. They just really are. It's in the middle that you get into, I think, a lot of trouble. First of all, the labeling part of it is very difficult to convince people. You tell somebody, you're an achieves. Well, I busted my butt for a whole year and you're telling me I'm an achieves? And I can remember you saying I did a great job here and a great job there, and you're making me an achieves. Well, we did this calibration and that's where you ended up. And maybe not as brutal as that, but it comes out that way. And then the next one is exceeds. Well, how come I'm not outstanding? I'm exceeds. That sounds like a good word. Sounds good. But I'm not outstanding, and I know outstanding is the best. So you get into these arguments, and then it's even worse if you use a numeric scale, particularly if you have a lot of engineers who say, why can't we go to 3.7 versus 3.5?
We did that this year.
And measure that. And so this is the age-old problem that you've brought up, and I don't think anybody has solved it.
I think
Remove it.
I personally think it's useless
Remove
and
it.
counterproductive.
I'm sorry?
I'm an employment attorney primarily, and I will tell you, I've had lawsuits, people suing, saying, I am not a 3, I am a 2. I have never been a 3.
Yeah.
I mean, it is,
Yeah.
I've never seen the value of it. I think it's a human resource myth that it has some value. We have some idea that it's adding some objectivity when it really is totally subjective. So I guess the question would be, I'm really surprised, because the way you were all talking, you were all speaking about honest feedback, and when you put numbers on it, I think you diminish the value of your feedback.
The problem really is, and this is the part that I don't think we figured, because if you look at all the articles, even the people who throw shit out, they've got sort of what they call the sort of the shadow review, like the behind the scenes stuff. So there's got to be something, right? Look, if you're a small organization, it's easier. You know everyone by name, you can say this and that. When you start to grow, you have to have a system, right? You have to. So you then have to put, what's that? It might not have to be numbers, but you have to have a system, right? So as long as you have a system, and the problem with a system is that it's a system, right? And so someone's got to fall into the things of that system, whether you call it a 5-point scale or a 4-point scale or achieves or it's the same thing. So I don't, unless you've got a brilliant idea, like I'll sit and have drinks with you because we haven't figured it out.
I mean, I'm totally with you, and I think we were talking earlier because I'm shopping for potentially a different system than what we're on today, and every system that I've looked at has, and I will
Except
not.
Liz, she's got a system that doesn't have that.
But here's the thing, and I agree with you. I think respectfully, when you're a smaller company, it's different. When I got to VEVO, we were 165 employees, and that was year 3 of the company, right? And they had not had any performance. I walked in, quick story, 3rd week on the job, and told, oh, we're behind in performance reviews. Can you do something for us? How far behind are you? Well, and it's like, okay, well, we need it yesterday. Okay, well, the challenge with that is when you get to a certain point, I mean, they were fine along the way when they were smaller, they knew everybody to your point, but then they got bigger all of a sudden, and it doesn't really work the same way. And people actually, if you looked at the employee engagement survey results from the year that I got there, and they were asking about, performance feedback and really performance reviews, they were really unhappy because they weren't getting, told how they were doing, not just the feedback, but they didn't understand, where the decisions were and some of the things. So we brought that in, and actually it spiked, it gave us better.
So there's a question there, but let me just, I went to school here in New York, and I went to a high school that was kind of an experimental high school. It was John Dewey. I don't know what they do now, but they started off with a pass-fail system, and I was like, that's brilliant, right? It's like you either pass or you fail. It's like there's nothing in between. People don't like it. They want to know that they're overachievers. So what do they end up doing? They put pass with this, pass with that, and it ended up being A, B, C, or D. You just had to map it differently. So the problem isn't the systems. The problem is people say they want something, but they really want something else, right? And that, so it's like the moment you take it away, like my engineers, they want levels. I'm like, why do you want levels? But they want levels. They want to know where they stand, and depending on your personality type, that works or doesn't. So as an employment lawyer, you know, you've got lots of years left of defending people who are on some sort of review scale,
I
right?
mean, but the way that we moved, I mean, just to finish my thought for a second, the way that, the way that we had moved, we're just taking the end of the story, where we moved is we adopted Review Snap. It's a very simple, like, honestly, no bells and whistles system, right? But what it gave us, because
What is Review Snap?
it's a performance net. I mean, it
Are you
handles-
plugging it? Is it good? Should I look at it? All right,
Well,
we'll talk about it later.
shopping
We'll
for
talk
you.
about it. Fair.
It's fine for what it does, right? But we're dipping around in the OKR world. We're dipping around, whatever. We're dipping around a lot of different things right now. So, but the point of the story is more around the scaling situation, right? And the fact that people people asked for the scale, we put the scale in, and then we had like anarchy, like I'm a 3, to your point, what makes me a 3 versus a 4? Why can't I be a 3.78? Like they literally, like it became one of those conversations. So what Review Snap did for us, right, is that it enabled us, and we do goals, but we also, to go back to my husband's comment about behaviors, is what I would, what he's, acknowledging, is we also evaluate people on behavioral competencies, right? Not just the values that we have in the organization, but what are the actions that we feel are intrinsic to who you are as a company. And I joke, for anybody who's in sales in the world, in this room, I apologize, but I often use the example of, you can have an amazing salesperson, right? They blow the numbers out of the roof, they're awesome for you. But they leave a wake behind you. Nobody wants to work with them, right? Like, do you keep them or do you not keep them, right? Because they're driving your sales, but no one wants to work with them. And in our old system, you really couldn't do anything about that, because you want to rate them really well because they're meeting their goals, and they'll say to you, okay, I'm making my goals. Well, why are you giving me whatever you're giving me? I'm doing well on my revenue targets. But I'm saying, okay, but nobody in any other department wants to work with you. There's something to that. So now in our new system, right, you actually can rate people. We rate them on their goals, and then we rate them on their competencies. And each competency has its own rating, and each goal has its own rating. And then there's, fancy algorithm in the back that rolls it up to a number. So you're not, as a manager, picking the number. You're going through each of the behaviors, and we have 16 of them, and you're going through each of the goals, and normally there's 3 to 5 of those. They're weighted.
That sounds
and then
so
they
simple.
roll back up. So then you get like a 3.78 whatever, and then we're not actually picking the number. It's being generated by all of that. Does that make sense?
The one thing I've heard, and I've not seen it done live, is at Google, I believe the engineers rate each other, and they're not rated by their managers. And so perhaps that's a way for people to kind of say, well, you know what, here's where I stand among my peers. I don't, if anyone's from Google and wants to talk to me, I'd love to learn more, but like, that might be a way to do it, I don't know. But then if you're not liked, then does that play a role? And there's so many factors. So there's a question over there, sorry, we keep talking.
I just wanted to know more your thoughts on organizational values and how the performance evaluation system aligns to that. And under that premise, obviously the most important value we're talking about here is the value of feedback. But what other values within your experience are you actually communicating to your employees that are important, that are part of the system?
We have launched an initiative around career pathing, and we're looking at it as a process that will allow people to grow and potentially go anywhere else in the company from where they are now in a particular function. So in order to do that, we not only have to have functional competencies, which are easy to identify, but also what we call universal competencies that we expect every employee in the company to aspire to and to learn to grow into. So it's things like being a leader, taking an opportunity to be a leader when that presents itself. Collaboration, learning how to collaborate. Teamwork, learning how to do that. Being a good communicator, which also means, by the way, being a good listener. Really hearing what people say. That's one of the unfortunate lacking competencies that I think we have in the world today, not just in companies. And so we're trying to drive these competencies, and we've just started, so I don't know how we're going to do, but everybody's very serious about it and likes it, and it makes everybody feel like I'm a citizen of Quantcast. I'm not just an operations person, an engineer, a salesperson, a human resources person, a legal person. I am a citizen of Quantcast. And as a citizen of Quantcast, we have these values. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, we have same type of thing, and then what we do, we have a monthly all-hands town hall meeting where the first thing we do every single town hall is we repeat the 10 core values because it helps people that have been.
Unison, like,
No, actually, the newest employee reads them, but we give them prep time so they're aware of it. But it helps remind the people that have been there years and years, and it helps the new people understand. And you hear it once a month. It used to be our CEO reading it, and we found that we switched it recently to the newest employee, and they actually really like it too, because then they go right into their introduction. But what you can do is tied off of those values that you keep kind of hitting everyone over the head with is then what projects are people working on within those, how everything bubbles up to like where the company's going, which projects, because there's core values that are going to be the same no matter what size you are, but then there's values that for the time, right? So like whether you're moving really quickly because you're small and you're growing and you're scaling, or you're building up a particular team, or it's maybe there's a pause moment and you're going to stay at that level for a little bit. Those change. So there's like static values and there's like ebb and flow values, and then where does someone fit in and what they're working on. Something you said earlier, Jack, that I really loved was that making people feel like what they're working on is really important. So I've had a lot of people, say, like, I want to work on something that's really important to the business. It's like, you are, and if that wasn't clear, then that's on us. Again, like, let's make it visible. So we have a Trello company overview board where we have our core current company goals and values, and every project that everyone's working on fits under one of them. So even whether it's on the back end or front end, if it's touching customers or if it's sales or whatever it is, where is that? Is it growth? Is it retention? Is it, where is that in something where our CEO at any point in time can say, you're the one working on that, amazing, like high five, what's the status on that? And you can see it and you have perspective at any time. So I think there's company values. I think there's, where the company happens to be values, what's important. Like, we didn't have a sales team. Now we have a large sales team, and I'm continuing to grow my sales team. That obviously changed the company, like, current goal, right? Like, all of a sudden, revenue is important. Imagine that. And it's like, and then I have developers, like, why do I have to work on this thing that's going to help revenue when that wasn't important before? Well, now it's important. And you have to explain the why before the what. Before, we were explaining the what, and the why came too late. And then I had frustrated employees that didn't know why we were doing something. And they're all really smart. You're hiring smart people. So explain the why up front and how they're going to play a part in that why, how they're helping drive the company get to the next stage, and how what they're working on is really important, because it should be. If it's not, then they should be working on something else.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
We have one more question.
Hey, thank you so much for all your thoughts. So the decoupling of salary and performance is really interesting. I think that's a real HR innovation. I'm curious to know two things. One, how do you convince other executives and leadership that these forward-thinking upfront costs are worthwhile? Because there are investments, and we all feel like they're worthwhile, but we have to convince the rest of the organization that they're worthwhile. And two, what implications do they have for hiring and exiting? Because obviously, like, if you're putting that much work into an employee while they're there, you have to put a lot of work into their hiring. And you mentioned a little bit what other work you do for exiting. And I mean, to anyone, specifically for Liz, but to anyone, how do you convince management for
So
these?
I'm lucky. I have buy-in from the top from day one. So this plan, though, is constantly reviewed by our entire exec team. So my exec team is myself, my VP of engineering, my VP of product, my VP of sales, marketing, ops, and my CEO. And we make sure everyone is on board. So that in itself takes some time. But if you do all get on board, then it's a lot more smooth sailing. So that is just something where my original co-founders and my CEO, it's just a core belief from there. So I didn't have the struggle of trying to convince anybody. If anything, it was them constantly reminding me, because I do sometimes, you go down a rabbit hole of thinking, and I'm like, maybe it would just be easier if we just do it the other way, like just go back. And they have to pull me back out of it and be like, no, and this is why we're doing it. I'm like, oh my God, right, like stay the course. What was your other question? And so, recruiting. It's actually a fantastic recruiting tool because I'm letting people know up front. Like, I talk salary in my first conversation with every candidate, and they know that it's going to be like market rate competitive, and I can give them information up front if they want to know, because our interview process is fairly long for any role. So I always say I don't want a candidate to get all the way to the end and not have certain needs met. So right off the bat, you don't have to share with me. But if you want to share with me, I can let you know if that's where we're going to come in. Because I have a chart for every single role. It's based off years of experience. They are an 8-year experience X. I can tell you what our offer is going to be. And I tell them if they push back and they say, oh, that's interesting, why do you do that? And I say, because we don't want to reward negotiators. If I have 2 people at the exact same experience, doing the exact same role, I don't want to pay them 2 different things. That's not fair. We should be paying them the same thing. Well, where do we get that information? I collect all the data from before, and then I let them know that if it changes, then it changes for everyone. So in fact, I actually did have a candidate recently who was applying for a role that we currently have people in for, or working at, and I gave the offer, and it was interesting because I was able to collect a lot of data from this particular hiring round that I didn't have before. I ended up not even hiring that person, but I ended up changing the chart to give all my current people raises because I was like, you guys, that's not the current market right now. And they were like, that's amazing, and that keeps them happy. And when I can talk to candidates and saying, we practice what we preach and this is how we do it, they know that that's something they never have to worry about again. My salary will be appropriate. I'm not fighting for it, I'm not negotiating with it. That's just something they're gonna take care of right away, and then I can focus on everything else. And then I also early on talk about full packages. So we give equity and we have a list of benefits. So I can just dive down into that early on, and they then take a deep breath. And the rest of the interview process comes down to task-oriented interviews, or depending on the role, what it is. And they don't have to worry that if they get all the way to the end, what the salary is. They also can tell me, it's very few people pull themselves out, but it's usually sales, and it's, their OTE is a different number than our OTE. We're still a startup. And so I can tell them, and they are like, thank you so much for not wasting my time. I'll be like, yeah, no, great. You didn't waste our time either. So being upfront early on, but letting them know how we're getting that information, where it's coming from, where we're collecting the data. And one thing I didn't say is every September we do leveling. So we don't do performance reviews, but we do leveling where we make sure we're paying market rates still. So every September, people know that on September 1, here's your new leveling number for your years of experience, here's where we're at in the market, who are, all these things like that.
So how do you differentiate by success, very good?
If you're working for a, yeah.
8 years, engineers, but you're either very good or very bad.
So if you're an 8-year engineer who's not very good or performing at what 8 years should be performing at, then you'll no longer be working for us.
But you don't make differences for performance.
Say this again?
You don't make differences for performance.
So there are cases where there are outliers. So there was recently a case where I had I'm going to fudge it a little bit, just to not divulge too much personal. Let's say there's a 3-year, on paper, experienced developer who is clearly performing at where other 5 years would be performing. If this person went out and got a job somewhere else, the level of competition, and this is, and the outliers are very clear. If you asked anyone at the company, they'd be like, oh yeah, that person, they're they're amazing, they're a superstar. Like usually an outlier is just like everyone is on board. And that's the case when you go and you have the leveling conversation, you're like, you're performing at beyond your years of experience. And we're gonna recognize that you're an outlier, you're now gonna be on this track and you're gonna be bumped up. There are those
It sounds
cases.
like it's the exception in that case, correct?
Say that again?
It's the exception
That is
versus-
the exception, but because there's no like, we're all sharing our things, but there's no perfect plan. So like even with our thing, there's times when people are performing beyond their years of experience, and they need to see that you recognize that in some way, shape, or form.